You know, we often think of ancient Rome as a place with shiny marble temples, winning armies, and wise senators talking about big questions. We imagine laurel wreaths, the Colosseum filled with cheering crowds, and aqueducts bringing clean water to busy cities. It all seems pretty amazing in our minds, doesn't it? But here's the thing about history. It has a habit of being much more complicated than our simple pictures suggest. Behind those marble columns and under those grand forums were practices that show something very uncomfortable about power, wealth, and the human cost of empire. Tonight, we're going to explore one of Rome's most hidden institutions, a story that the Romans themselves liked to keep in the shadows, even though it happened right out in the open among their richest citizens. Tonight, you are standing in a slave market in the Syrian province of the Roman Empire around 55 AD. But you're not a merchant or a curious traveler. You are a 14-year-old boy named Marcus, though that's not the name you were born with. Your original name, your real name, was thrown away when you were bought 6 months ago. You stand on a raised platform, wearing expensive silk that feels strange against your skin, your hair oiled and curled in the Greek style, your face painted with makeup you never wanted to wear. Around your neck hangs a golden collar beautifully made, marking you not as a field worker or house servant, but as something else entirely. A puer delicatus, a delicate boy, a living status symbol for Rome's rich people. You are property, yes, but expensive property. You are meant to be beautiful, obedient, and above all, decorative. This is not a story about willing friendship or affection. This is a story about planned exploitation, about boys treated as luxury items, about an institution that Rome's wealthy class kept going with casual cruelty, while poets wrote verses celebrating your good fortune. The evidence for this practice comes from multiple sources that archaeologists and historians have carefully put together. Poems by Martial and Catullus that casually mention these enslaved boys, legal documents talking about their purchase and ownership, historical accounts like those of Suetonius and Tacitus, and most hauntingly the story of Sporus, a boy whose name we actually know because his suffering was so terrible that even Roman historians couldn't completely ignore it. These fragments, pieced together like a mosaic that no one wanted to complete, reveal a system where boys as young as 10 were acquired specifically for sexual exploitation, dressed in finery that mocked their captivity, and thrown away when they aged past their usefulness. It's rather like discovering that behind the beautiful front of a mansion, there were locked rooms containing evidence of crimes no one wanted to admit. This discovery, made through careful analysis of Roman literature, legal texts, and historical accounts over the past century, reveals something extraordinary about how power operates when not checked by law or basic human rights. As we settle in tonight, we're going to uncover not just what archaeologists and historians found, but what it tells us about the surprisingly brutal realities that existed alongside Rome's celebrated civilization. But before we begin this journey together, write in the comments where you are listening from. It's fascinating to learn where in the world you are. Also, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. Now, dim the lights and prepare to discover why this story will change how you think about the true cost of Roman luxury and power. Chapter 1. The Market of Beautiful Children. The acquisition of puer delicati began in places most Romans would never see. The faraway provinces of the empire where poverty, war, and desperation created a steady supply of vulnerable children. You, Marcus, remember the day you were sold. Your family in Cappadocia, a region in what is now Turkey, faced starvation after a failed harvest. The man who bought you from your crying father paid enough silver to feed your family for 2 years. Your father couldn't look at you as the transaction was completed. You were 12 years old. The Roman slave markets worked with ruthless efficiency, and within that system existed specialized dealers who focused only on acquiring young boys who met specific requirements. Beauty, of course, was most important. Smooth skin, delicate features, a certain vulnerability that wealthy Romans found appealing. Boys from the Greek-speaking provinces were especially prized, as Greek culture was associated with refinement and education. Syrian boys with their dark eyes and olive skin were fashionable during certain periods. The trade routes that brought silk and spices from the east also brought children packaged and transported like any other luxury item. Historical sources reveal the casual nature of these transactions. Martial, the Roman poet, writes verse after verse about beautiful slave boys, describing them as one might describe a fine wine or an expensive piece of furniture. He mentions their names, diadumenus, Eerinus, telesphorus, with the same tone he uses to discuss his dinner menu. The poet Statius wrote an entire poem about Eerinus, a puer delicatus owned by the Emperor Domitian, describing his beauty and his castration with language that tries to make it sound elegant, even desirable. Reading these poems today is rather like finding love letters that casually mention kidnapping. The disconnect is profound. The boys who entered this system came from various circumstances, but none came willingly. Some, like you, were sold by poor families who viewed it as a transaction that would at least keep their child alive and possibly even prosperous. A desperate reason born of impossible choices. Others were captured during military campaigns. When Rome conquered a region, the spoils included not just gold and territory, but people. Boys who caught the eye of slave traders during these conquests found themselves transported hundreds of miles from everything they knew. Unable to speak the language, completely at the mercy of their captors. The selection process was dehumanizing in its precision. Traders examined boys the way horse dealers examined colts, checking teeth, skin quality, body proportions. They looked for boys on the edge of adolescence, young enough to be trained and molded, but showing the first signs of the beauty they would possess in their teenage years. Age was crucial. Most were acquired between 10 and 13 years old. Too young and they weren't yet attractive to potential buyers. Too old and they'd already passed the narrow window of desirability that this market demanded. Once bought by a trader, boys entered a preparation phase that was part grooming, part psychological breaking. You remember this period with the clarity of trauma, being bathed repeatedly, your hair treated with expensive oils, your nails cleaned and shaped. You were taught to walk differently, to lower your eyes, to stand in poses that displayed you to advantage. Obedience was enforced through a combination of rewards and punishments that left no marks on valuable skin. You learned quickly that resistance led to hunger, cold, isolation. Obedience led to food, warmth, and the temporary stopping of fear. The economic realities of this trade were staggering. A healthy field slave might cost 1,500 sesterces, a substantial sum, roughly equal to a year's wages for a skilled worker. A puer delicatus could cost 10 times that amount. The most beautiful boys, particularly those with education or musical training, could fetch prices that would buy a small farm with workers included. This wasn't subsistence slavery, this was luxury slavery, where the enslaved person's value came entirely from aesthetic qualities and the status their ownership gave to their buyer. Legal documents from the period reveal the contractual nature of these sales. Roman law was remarkably detailed about property rights, and enslaved people were property. Bills of sale specified physical characteristics, any defects, which might include scars or even left-handedness, and guarantees against disease. Some contracts included return policies if the slave proved unsuitable, language that sounds strangely commercial when you remember we're discussing children. The law provided extensive protections for buyers who felt they had been deceived about their purchase, but zero protections for the boys being bought and sold. The journey to Rome or other major cities was itself an ordeal. Boys were transported in groups, chained together to prevent escape, traveling for weeks or months, depending on their starting point. You made this journey in a wagon with 7 other boys, none of whom spoke your language. One boy, younger than the rest, cried the entire first week until he simply ran out of tears. Another tried to escape one night and was beaten so badly that he walked with a permanent limp afterward, dramatically reducing his value, as the trader angrily pointed out. Upon arrival in Rome, the boys were taken to specialized markets. The Sciapta Julia, a large covered complex in the Campus Martius, housed some of the most upscale slave trading. Here, wealthy Romans would come to browse, attended by their advisors and household managers. You remember standing in a row with other boys, all of you dressed in fine tunics despite being for sale, all of you trained to smile and pose and demonstrate whatever skills you possessed. Buyers would examine you personally, touching your face, checking your physique, sometimes having you perform, sing a song, recite poetry, dance. The humiliation of being handled like merchandise by strangers who discussed your merits and flaws in front of you was complete. The buyers themselves represented the top of Roman society. Wealthy senators, successful merchants, military officers enriched by conquest, and occasionally members of the imperial family would purchase these boys. Owning a beautiful puer delicatus was a status symbol, a visible demonstration of wealth and taste. It said, I am so rich that I can afford to own a human being whose only function is to be decorative and provide me with pleasure. It was obvious consumption taken to its most disturbing extreme. Some buyers had specific preferences and would commission traders to find boys matching detailed specifications. Historical accounts mention buyers who wanted only Greek boys, or only Syrians, or boys with particular hair colors or musical abilities. These custom orders could take months to fulfill, with traders sending agents throughout the empire to find children matching the requirements. The entire system operated with the efficiency and sophistication of any other luxury goods market, because that's exactly what it was. Chapter 2. The Gilded Cage. Your first day in your new owner's household was confusing. A vast urban mansion in the heart of Rome, decorated with wealth beyond anything you'd imagined in your provincial village. Painted walls depicting mythological scenes, mosaics of staggering complexity covering every floor, furniture inlaid with ivory and exotic woods, gardens with fountains and imported plants. Your owner, Marcus Antonius Priscus, was a senator who'd made his fortune in the grain trade and military service. He was 57 years old, married, father of 3 grown children, and now he owned you. The life of a puer delicatus existed in strange contradictions. You wore silk tunics and gold jewelry. You slept on an expensive couch in a small room next to your owner's private chambers. You ate food that would have seemed impossibly luxurious to your family. Roasted meats, fresh fruits, honeyed pastries. You were groomed daily by skilled servants. Your hair styled, your skin treated with expensive oils. To an outsider, you might have appeared privileged, even pampered. But every single aspect of this apparent luxury was designed to reinforce your position as a possession without freedom. The silk tunic wasn't for your comfort. It was to make you more appealing to your owner's eyes and his guests' envious gazes. The jewelry marked you as valuable property. The golden collar around your neck clearly showing your enslaved status while also displaying your owner's wealth. The food and grooming kept your appearance, keeping you attractive, much as a wealthy horse owner ensures their prized stallion is well-fed and gleaming. Roman households were complex social hierarchies, and peri delicati occupied a strange position within them. You ranked above field slaves and ordinary household servants in terms of the resources spent on you, but you possessed even less actual power than they did. A cook or steward might develop skills that gave them some leverage, some small degree of negotiating power. You had only your appearance, which was naturally temporary, and your obedience, which was required. Other household slaves viewed you with a mixture of pity and contempt, pity for what you endured, contempt for the perceived ease of your position and the special treatment you received. Your daily schedule was dictated entirely by your owner's desires and social calendar. Mornings often meant accompanying him to the public baths, a central feature of Roman social life. You would walk behind him through the streets, dressed in your finest tunic, your presence announcing his status to everyone he encountered. At the baths you might assist him, carry his oils and scrapers, stand nearby looking decorative while he conducted business and socialized. The message was clear. Look what I own. Look what I can afford. Afternoons might involve being displayed during social visits. When other wealthy Romans visited your owner's home, you would be called to serve wine, to play music if you had that skill, or simply to stand nearby as a living decoration. Guests would comment on your appearance, sometimes discussing you as though you weren't present, sometimes addressing you with the false affection one might show a pet dog. What a lovely boy, they would say, the compliment directed not to you, but to your owner, praising his taste in acquisitions. The most documented practice, and the one Roman poets wrote about most frequently, was the custom of having these enslaved boys attend parties. Roman dinner parties were elaborate affairs lasting hours, featuring multiple courses and significant quantities of wine. You would be required to stand behind your owner's dining couch, ready to refill his cup, offer him food, or be displayed to his guests. Sometimes you would be required to recline beside him, a visible symbol of his wealth and power. The fact that you were a child being put on display for adults' aesthetic pleasure was never acknowledged as the atrocity. It was. Instead, it was treated as normal, even elegant. The psychological impact of this existence cannot be overstated. You were constantly watched, constantly on display, never allowed privacy or personhood. Your value depended entirely on maintaining an appearance and behavior that pleased your owner. Any sign of sadness, anger, or resistance lowered your worth. You learned to control your features into whatever expression was expected. Usually a slight smile, a look of contentment, an appearance of willing service. Behind that carefully maintained mask, you were a terrified child pretending to be the decorative object your owner wanted you to be. Education was provided to puer delicati, but always with practical purposes. You were taught to read and write Latin and Greek, not for your own enlightenment, but so you could read poetry aloud entertainingly or write messages for your owner. You received instruction in music, the lyre, the flute, because musical performances increased your value as entertainment. Some boys were taught dancing, trained in styles that were designed to be alluring, required to perform for guests at parties. Every skill you acquired belonged to your owner, was performed at his command for his benefit and glory. Roman writers occasionally expressed discomfort with the most extreme manifestations of this practice, but their concerns were typically about excess rather than the fundamental immorality of the system. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, wrote critically about wealthy Romans who owned multiple beautiful slave boys. But his objection was to the wastefulness and lack of self-control, not to the enslaved boy's suffering. It's rather like criticizing someone for owning too many expensive cars while never questioning whether people should be property in the first place. The physical abuse inherent in this system was rarely discussed explicitly in Roman sources, mostly because it was so normalized as to not need comment. But the implications are clear in the sources we do have. Legal texts discuss the rights of owners to discipline their slaves in any manner that didn't kill them or make them permanently unable to work. Poetry references the obedience and compliance of these boys in contexts that make clear this wasn't willing service. Historical accounts occasionally mention specific instances of abuse when they involved prominent people or particularly shocking circumstances, but these rare mentions represent only the most visible fraction of systematic exploitation. Some boys were subjected to permanent physical alterations to maintain their appeal. The practice of castration, removing a boy's testicles to prevent puberty and maintain a youthful appearance, was technically illegal under several emperors. But the laws were inconsistently enforced and applied mainly to Roman citizens, not enslaved people from the provinces. The procedure was dangerous and traumatic, performed without anesthesia with a significant death rate. Boys who survived faced lifelong health consequences and the psychological trauma of this violation. Yet Roman writers discussed it with aesthetic language, describing castrated slaves as maintaining their beauty longer, as though this somehow justified the horror. Your owner never subjected you to castration, though he threatened it once when you were 14 and beginning to show signs of developing a deeper voice and facial hair. The threat alone was enough to ensure your terrified compliance. You learned to pluck any facial hair, to speak in a higher register than felt natural, to do anything that might preserve the appearance of youth. That was your only protection from worse fates. Chapter 3. The most famous victim. Of all the enslaved boys whose stories have come down to us, usually as brief mentions in poetry or historical accounts, names without narratives, one story was so spectacular, so extreme in its cruelty, that multiple Roman historians felt compelled to record it despite their general reluctance to dwell on such matters. This is the story of Sporus, a boy whose name we actually know, whose suffering was so public and so connected to imperial power that it couldn't be completely hidden. Sporus enters the historical record around 65 AD, during the reign of Emperor Nero. Historical accounts by Suetonius, Tacitus, and Cassius Dio tell us that Nero met this boy whose age is never specified, but was almost certainly early adolescence based on the context, and became fixated on him because he apparently resembled Nero's deceased wife, Poppaea Sabina. Poppaea had died the previous year, possibly from complications after Nero kicked her while she was pregnant, though accounts vary. Nero's grief over her death was reportedly intense, though this didn't prevent him from immediately seeking to replace her. What Nero did next reveals the absolute power emperors held over enslaved people and the complete absence of legal or social constraints on that power. He decided that Sporus would literally replace Poppaea, but there was a problem. Sporus was male. Nero's solution was to order Sporus castrated, then married him in a public ceremony complete with all the traditional Roman marriage customs, including a dowry, wedding veil, and public procession. He then declared Sporus his empress and required the court to treat him as such. The historical sources describe this with varying degrees of horror, but their horror was typically focused on the insult to Roman marriage traditions and the emperor's dignity, rather than on what was being done to Sporus himself. Suetonius writes that Nero went through a formal wedding ceremony with him, dowry, bridal veil. and all, and treated him as his wife. Cassius Dio adds details about Sporus being forced to wear women's clothing and makeup, to appear in public as the empress, to fulfill all the ceremonial roles an empress would perform. The historians record these facts with disapproval, but Sporus's terror, pain, and utter lack of choice in any of this is mentioned only by implication. The forced castration itself, a surgical procedure without anesthesia, performed on a young boy who had no choice in the matter, is described in these sources with clinical detachment. The operation was likely performed by a specialist, as there were doctors in Rome who conducted these procedures despite their questionable legality. The recovery would have been agonizing, the infection risk substantial, the psychological trauma immeasurable. Sporus survived, but at what cost to his physical and mental health we can only imagine. For the next 3 years, Sporus was required to perform the role Nero had assigned him. He appeared at public ceremonies dressed in the empress's clothing. He participated in religious rites that traditionally required the emperor's wife. He was paraded through Rome in the empress's litter, displayed to the people as Nero's spouse. Roman citizens watched this spectacle with a mixture of fascination and unease, but no one had the power or the will to intervene on Sporus's behalf. The cruelty of this situation extended beyond the initial violation. Sporus was trapped in a role that made him both highly visible and completely powerless. He couldn't escape without certain death. He couldn't refuse Nero's demands without facing torture or execution. He couldn't even express the reality of his suffering because his role required him to play the willing, devoted wife of an emperor who had destroyed his body and his life for an elaborate delusion. Roman satirists had a field day with this situation, writing mocking verses about Nero marrying a boy, about the absurdity of calling Sporus an empress. But their mockery, like the historians' disapproval, focused on the transgression against social norms, rather than on the atrocity being committed against an enslaved child. The joke was that Nero was acting inappropriately, not that Sporus was being tortured. It's rather like criticizing someone for breaking dress code rules while they're committing murder, a catastrophic failure of moral priorities. When Nero died in 68 AD, Sporus's nightmare didn't end. It simply changed forms. The next emperor, Galba, had no use for Nero's empress. But Sporus's association with Nero made him a valuable political pawn. Galba reportedly considered having Sporus publicly executed as part of a display denouncing Nero's excesses. Only Galba's own quick downfall prevented this fate. The next emperor, Otho, had actually been married to Poppaea before Nero took her, and he became obsessed with Sporus for the same reasons Nero had, his resemblance to the dead empress. Sporus was forced into another round of the same role, now serving a different emperor in the same capacity. Finally, when Otho died and Vitellius became emperor, Sporus faced a new threat. Vitellius planned to stage public games that would include forcing Sporus to play the role of a mythological maiden being ravished, a humiliation intended both as entertainment and as a final degradation of Nero's memory. Faced with this prospect, Sporus made the only choice left to him. He killed himself. The historians record his death, almost as a footnote. Cassius Dio writes simply that Sporus committed suicide to avoid further humiliation. The method isn't specified, the location isn't mentioned. There's no indication that anyone mourned him or viewed his death as the tragedy it was. He was approximately 17 or 18 years old. Sporus's story is exceptional in its extremity and in being documented at all, but it illuminates a system that affected thousands of boys whose names we'll never know. If this could happen to a boy in the most visible position imaginable, married to the emperor, present at every public ceremony, what happened to the enslaved boys in private households, owned by men whose actions would never be recorded by historians? Sporus's story suggests the answer. Anything their owners wanted with complete impunity. Chapter 4. The Ideology of Domination. To understand how Roman society could maintain this system so openly, we need to examine the cultural beliefs that made it possible. Roman masculinity ideology was fundamentally about power and domination. The ideal Roman man was a citizen who controlled his household, commanded slaves and servants, dominated in business and politics, and demonstrated his status through visible signs of power. Sexual behavior was judged not by the gender of one's partners, but by whether one maintained the dominant role. This is a crucial distinction that modern audiences often misunderstand. Romans didn't categorize people by sexual orientation as modern societies do. Instead, they focused obsessively on active versus passive roles. A Roman citizen man could sexually use enslaved people of any gender without any social stigma as long as he maintained the penetrative role. The penetrated person was viewed as degraded, feminized, and inferior, which is exactly why doing this to enslaved boys was considered acceptable. It reinforced the power hierarchy that Roman society was built upon. The legal framework reflected and reinforced this ideology. Roman law was extraordinarily detailed about property rights, inheritance, contracts, and citizen responsibilities. But enslaved people existed outside this legal protection almost entirely. An owner could sexually abuse his slaves with the same legal impunity he had to use his furniture or livestock. There was no concept of assault or rape when the victim was property. The only relevant law concerned damage to another person's property. If you damaged someone else's slave, you owed compensation to the owner, not the enslaved person. This complete absence of legal personhood meant enslaved boys had no recourse, no appeal, no possibility of justice. If your owner harmed you, you had no standing to complain. If another free person harmed you without your owner's permission, your owner could seek damages, but you received nothing. The harm to your body and mind was legally irrelevant. Only the economic harm to your owner's property mattered. It's a level of dehumanization that's difficult to fully grasp from our modern perspective. Roman writers occasionally discussed the proper treatment of slaves, but always from the owner's perspective, and usually focused on maintaining the value of one's property. Advice texts counseled against excessive cruelty because it made slaves rebellious and damaged valuable property, not because cruelty was inherently wrong. The closest thing to rights that enslaved people possessed were the informal protections of custom and the owner's self-interest in maintaining their property's value. Protections that were unreliable at best and non-existent at worst. The cultural glorification of Greek pederastic traditions provided intellectual cover for these practices. Greeks had a tradition of older men mentoring younger boys in relationships that included sexual components. And while this Greek system was itself exploitative, it at least nominally included elements of education and long-term mutual obligation. Romans appropriated the aesthetic of this tradition while stripping away even its limited protections, creating a system of purely transactional exploitation while dressing it in language borrowed from Greek philosophy and poetry. Poets like Martial wrote verse after verse celebrating beautiful slave boys, describing them with language that sounds affectionate but was actually possessive. He writes about their physical beauty, their skills, their obedience, always from the perspective of an owner or potential owner, never acknowledging their humanity or suffering. Reading these poems today is deeply uncomfortable because the artistry of the language keeps clashing with the atrocity of the content. It's rather like reading technically proficient poetry about someone's favorite tools, except the tools are traumatized children. Some Roman moralists did express discomfort with the most excessive displays of this system. Seneca criticized wealthy Romans for owning multiple beautiful slaves and treating them as interchangeable objects of pleasure. But even Seneca's criticism accepted the fundamental system. He merely thought individual Romans should practice more self-control and moderation. The problem in his view was excess and lack of virtue in the owner, not the inherent immorality of owning and exploiting human beings. It's a perfect example of how even progressive voices within a society can fail to question its fundamental assumptions. The religious dimension of Roman life offered no protection either. Roman religion was largely civic and transactional. You performed the correct rituals to maintain good relationships with the gods who might grant you prosperity and success. There was no concept of universal human dignity, no religious teaching suggesting that all people possessed inherent worth. The gods themselves in Roman mythology regularly engaged in sexual violence and dominance, providing divine precedent for human behavior. This ideology permeated every level of Roman society. Even Romans who weren't wealthy enough to own peri delicati participated in the system that made their exploitation possible. They attended dinner parties where these boys served wine. They watched them in public processions. They read poetry celebrating them. They participated in conversations that treated enslaved children as aesthetic objects. The normalization was total. Chapter 5. The Aging Out. You're now 18 years old, and the nightmare you've lived for 6 years is entering a new phase, one that may prove even more terrifying than what you've already endured. Your voice has deepened despite your efforts. You need to shave daily now. Your face has lost the soft androgyny it possessed at 12, developing more angular masculine features. Your owner has begun looking at you with a different expression, not desire, but calculation, assessment. You are aging out of your purpose, and you know what that means. The cruel mathematics of the puer delicatus system meant that every enslaved boy faced a looming deadline. The qualities that made them valuable, youth, beauty, vulnerability, were naturally temporary. Most boys were aged out by their late teens or early 22nds, considered too old to fulfill the aesthetic purpose for which they'd been acquired. What happened next varied, but none of the options were good. Some owners, having lost interest in their now adult former puer delicati, would reassign them to other household roles. You might find yourself suddenly working in the kitchens, serving tables, or performing manual labor, a sudden fall in status that came with new hardships. Servants who had viewed with contempt when you were a privileged pet now had authority over you. The special treatment ended, but the trauma remained, and now you had to perform hard physical labor while processing everything that had been done to you. Other owners chose to sell their aged-out pueri delicati. The market for young boys was strong, but adult men who'd been exploited since childhood had limited appeal to the buyers who frequented the luxury slave markets. Some ended up in brothels, legal establishments in Rome, where enslaved people were forced into prostitution. This represented a further degradation, moving from being one person's property to being used by multiple paying customers. The brothel owners worked their enslaved workers extensively. The conditions were often terrible, despite Rome's famous infrastructure, and the life expectancy of brothel slaves was significantly shorter than household slaves. A fortunate few, and fortunate is a desperately relative term here, might be freed by their owners. Manumission, the formal freeing of a slave, did occur in Rome, though less frequently than popular culture suggests. An owner might free an aging puer delicatus for various reasons. Genuine affection in rare cases, public displays of generosity, or simply to avoid the expense of maintaining property that had lost its value. But freedom for a man who'd been enslaved since childhood came with enormous challenges. You had no family connections, no wealth, no legitimate trade skills, and a past that was written on your body and psyche. Many freed former pueri delicati ended up in poverty, turning to prostitution now as free workers rather than enslaved ones. A change in legal status that barely improved their circumstances. The psychological impact of this aging out process cannot be overstated. Imagine spending your childhood and adolescence being valued only for your appearance, told constantly that your worth lies in your beauty and youth. Then imagine reaching the inevitable point where those qualities begin to fade. You watch yourself becoming worthless in real time, knowing that the person who owns you is making calculations about your future usefulness. The terror of not knowing what will happen to you combines with the crushing understanding that your suffering over the years was seen as justified by your appearance. And now even that justification is expiring. Some boys didn't wait to find out what fate their owners had planned for them. Suicide among enslaved people in Rome was common enough that it was discussed in legal and philosophical texts, usually in the context of property loss for owners. When an enslaved person killed themselves, it represented an economic loss, and texts debated whether certain types of treatment might push property to self-destruction, and how to prevent this loss. The enslaved person's suffering was relevant only as it pertained to their owner's financial interests. The sources don't give us statistics on suicide rates among pueri delicati specifically, but the few documented cases we have suggest it was not uncommon. Sporus's suicide when faced with further public humiliation is the most famous example, but he almost certainly wasn't alone. For boys who'd endured years of exploitation with the knowledge that it would eventually end, but not knowing what would follow, suicide might have seemed like the only choice they could actually make for themselves. It's a devastating indictment of the system that self-destruction could represent agency. For you, Marcus, the ending came when your owner sold you to a brothel keeper for a fraction of what he had originally paid. You worked there for 3 years before a plague, one of the periodic epidemics that swept through Rome's crowded tenements, claimed your life at age 21. You died surrounded by strangers, your name unknown to them, your life story untold and unrecorded. You're a composite of the thousands of boys whose experiences were real, but whose individual stories weren't preserved because Rome didn't consider your story worth preserving. Chapter 6. The evidence they left behind. So, how do we know about this system if Rome actively avoided discussing it explicitly? The evidence comes from multiple sources, and piecing it together is like assembling a mosaic where 3/4 of the tiles are missing. But the remaining pieces are enough to reveal the essential picture. First, there's the literary evidence, poetry, particularly from Martial, Catullus, and Statius. These poets wrote extensively about beautiful slave boys, describing them in terms that make their status and purpose clear. Martial's epigrams frequently reference enslaved boys by name, praising their beauty, discussing their value, making jokes about other men's ownership of them. While the poetry uses indirect language, the context makes the reality unmistakable. Statius's poem about Erinus, Emperor Domitian's puer delicatus, is particularly revealing because it's an extended work that describes the boy's castration, his service to the emperor, and his daily life in language that attempts to make exploitation sound elegant. Second, historical accounts from writers like Suetonius, Tacitus, and Cassius Dio provide specific examples. The story of Sporus is the most detailed, but these historians also make numerous passing references to other emperors and wealthy Romans' ownership of young male slaves for sexual purposes. These accounts were written by elite Roman men for an elite Roman audience, and their casual tone reveals how normalized this practice was. They mention these enslaved boys the way modern journalists might mention someone's expensive car or vacation home as markers of wealth and status that need no explanation. Third, legal texts and documents provide evidence of the framework that made this system possible. Roman law codes that have survived discuss the ownership, sale, and control of slaves in extensive detail. While they don't typically specify pueri delicati as a separate legal category, the absence of legal protection for enslaved children's bodily autonomy, combined with explicit laws about property rights over slaves, creates the legal structure necessary for systematic exploitation. Some legal texts discuss inheritance of slaves, including young male slaves, in terms that make clear what their purpose was. Fourth, archaeological evidence, while less direct, provides supporting context. Frescoes from Pompeii and other sites sometimes depict young male servants in wealthy households in poses and contexts that align with literary descriptions. Inscriptions occasionally reference enslaved people by name, with descriptions that match the puer delicatus profile. Grave markers for young enslaved males sometimes include epitaphs that hint at their role, though usually in indirect language. The physical layout of wealthy Roman houses with small chambers next to the owner's private rooms matches descriptions of where these enslaved boys lived. Fifth, the distribution of names in historical records provides subtle evidence. Certain names appear repeatedly associated with young male slaves in literary and historical sources. Greek names, names referring to beauty or youth, names that mark the enslaved person as exotic or foreign. The patterns in naming reveal the commodification process where boys were renamed by their owners with names that highlighted their role and origin, stripping away their original identity. The challenge with this evidence is that much of it is indirect or requires reading between the lines. Romans didn't write explicit sociological studies of their own society. They wrote for other Romans who shared their assumptions and needed no explanation of common practices. When Martial mentions a beautiful enslaved boy in a poem, he doesn't stop to explain the system to his readers because they already understood it. Modern historians have to reconstruct context from fragments and implications. Another challenge is that the voices of the enslaved boys themselves are almost entirely absent. They weren't educated to write their own accounts. The literacy they were sometimes taught was for their owners' purposes. They had no legal standing to testify. They had no platform to share their experiences. Everything we know about their lives comes filtered through the perspectives of free Romans, usually wealthy men, writing for other free Romans. The boys are described, discussed, and analyzed, but they never speak for themselves in the historical record. This absence is itself significant evidence. The systematic silencing of enslaved people's voices was part of the mechanism that maintained slavery. When enslaved people couldn't tell their own stories, it was easier for free Romans to maintain the fiction that enslaved people weren't fully human, weren't suffering in ways that should matter, weren't individuals with experiences and emotions equal to free people. The silence is deliberate and telling. Modern historians approach this topic with increasing directness. Earlier scholars sometimes minimized or used indirect language about these practices, using language about favorites or companions that obscured the reality of exploitation. Contemporary historical scholarship tends to be more blunt, acknowledging these relationships as what they were: systematic sexual abuse of enslaved children by their owners, facilitated by a legal and cultural system that treated human beings as property. The evidence has always been there. How scholars interpret and present it has changed, as modern ethical frameworks have evolved. What this evidence reveals is a society that combined remarkable sophistication in some areas, engineering, law, literature, military organization, with practices of staggering cruelty. Rome built aqueducts and sewers that wouldn't be matched in Europe for over a millennium. Roman law influenced legal systems worldwide. Roman literature included profound philosophical and ethical reflections, and alongside all of this, Rome maintained a system that treated enslaved children as luxury items, exploited them systematically, and discarded them when they aged out of usefulness. These aren't contradictory aspects of Roman civilization. They're interconnected features of a society built fundamentally on power, dominance, and the conviction that some humans were inherently superior to others. As our journey through this difficult chapter of Roman history concludes tonight, we're reminded that the past is far from dusty and dull. Sometimes it's viscerally uncomfortably real in ways that challenge our romanticized images of ancient civilizations. Behind the marble temples and victorious legions existed human suffering that was systematic, normalized, and deliberately obscured by those with the power to record history. It's a vibrant, often surprising, and always intriguing tapestry woven with human ingenuity, resilience, and yes, sometimes profound cruelty that makes us question the cost of empire and the nature of power. The boys whose stories we've explored tonight, Marcus, Sporus, and thousands whose names we'll never know, lived in a system that denied them humanity while surrounding them with luxury. They were property dressed in silk, children treated as decorative objects, human beings whose suffering was considered irrelevant to their purpose. Their voices were silenced, their experiences dismissed, their lives considered disposable. But the evidence they left behind, fragmentary as it is, testifies to their existence and their suffering in ways that demand acknowledgement. Understanding this history matters not because it's sensational, but because it reveals something essential about how societies can normalize atrocity when power is sufficiently concentrated and unchecked. The Romans who participated in this system weren't monsters from another planet. They were humans operating within a cultural framework that told them this was acceptable, even admirable. That should make us deeply uncomfortable and deeply curious about what practices in our own time might be judged with horror by future generations. Until our next archaeological adventure together, this is the Sleeping Archaeologist, encouraging you to remain curious about the incredible tales still waiting to be discovered beneath our feet, even when those tales challenge us and make us confront uncomfortable truths about human nature and the cost of civilization. Sweet dreams, fellow explorers. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and may your rest be filled with compassion for those whose voices were silenced and determination to ensure we learn from history's darkest chapters. But for now, stay tuned as we have a bonus story coming right up, read especially for you by our guest narrator.
Thanks for having me. Our next story is called Rome's Gladiators, the dark truth Hollywood won't show you. When you think of a Roman gladiator, what pops into your head? It's probably a man with a jawline sharp enough to cut marble, abs that have their own zip code, and a noble simmering intensity. He's Russell Crowe in a leather skirt, fighting for the memory of his murdered family, defying a corrupt emperor with every defiant swing of his sword. He's a volunteer, a fallen general, a hero choosing the arena's brutal meritocracy over a world of injustice. He is, in short, a movie star. And we've bought into this myth for so long that we've basically accepted it as fact, a kind of historical comfort food. It's a great story. The problem is it's about as historically accurate as a caveman riding a dinosaur to his 9-to-5 office job. The idea that the ranks of gladiators were filled with brooding, honorable men making a principled career choice is a comforting, dramatic, and entirely modern invention. It's a Hollywood fever dream, It's like believing that every single person in a maximum security prison is actually an undercover cop trying to expose the warden. It's a narrative that sanitizes one of the most brutal, exploitative, and profitable industries in human history, turning a story of systematic abuse into a tale of individual heroism. The noble gladiator fighting for honor was a lie. Tonight you are not a hero. You are not a volunteer. You are property. The year is 80 AD, and you have just been unloaded from a stinking cargo ship at the port of Ostia, chained to 20 other men who smell of fear and month-old sweat. You are a Batavian captured in the latest skirmish on the Rhine frontier, and your life as a free man is a fading memory. You have been sold like a sack of grain or a bolt of cloth to a man named Decimus Vipanus, the Lanista, or owner of the Ludus Magnus, the largest gladiator training school in Rome. You are not here for glory. You are an asset, a line, item on a ledger, and your body is now a commodity in the most spectacular and depraved entertainment business the world has ever known. You are a rookie, a tyro, and you are utterly, completely expendable. The proof of your real story, the raw, unfiltered truth, wasn't found on a triumphant arch or in a poet's epic verse. It was found scratched into the plaster walls of a gladiator barracks in Pompeii, buried under volcanic ash for nearly 2,000 years. Archaeologists uncovered not grand inscriptions, but desperate human graffiti. There were crude drawings of victorious fighters, stick figures holding oversized swords. There were boasts, Celidas, the Thracian. The heartthrob of the girls. There were bitter rivalries laid bare. These weren't the words of Stoic heroes. They were the ancient equivalent of a prisoner's social media feed, a series of desperate posts scrolled on a cell wall. They are the receipts, the undeniable proof that you and the men around you were not mythical champions. You were scared, lonely, boastful, and tragically human people trapped in an impossible system trying to carve out a sliver of identity on the only canvas you had left, a plaster wall. This discovery made in the ruins of Pompeii reveals something extraordinary about the vast, brutal business of the Roman games. As we settle in tonight, we're going to uncover not just what archaeologists found, but what it tells us about the surprisingly relatable lives of people who lived in Imperial Rome. Now, dim the lights and prepare to discover why this story will change how you think about the gladiator. The first thing you notice about Rome isn't the grandeur. It's the smell. A thick, oppressive blanket of aromas hits you the moment your captors march you off the gangplank and onto the dusty road leading to the city. It's a complex and deeply unpleasant cocktail. The sharp tang of human waste from the overflowing gutters, the scent of roasting meat and baking bread from countless street vendors, the cloying sweetness of cheap incense burning at roadside shrines, and underneath it all, a pervasive low-level funk of too many people and animals crammed into one space. It's the smell of 1,000,000 lives being lived at full volume. A chaotic symphony for the nose. The sounds are just as overwhelming. The clatter of iron-rimmed wagon wheels on stone. The endless shouting of merchants, the braying of donkeys, the murmur of a dozen different languages you don't understand. After months in the quiet, damp forests of Germania, this is a full-scale assault on your senses. You are a tiny, insignificant piece of driftwood caught in a raging urban river, and it is terrifying. Your destination looms in the distance, a shadow against the brilliant blue sky. The Flavian Amphitheater, the building they are calling the Colosseum. It is impossibly huge, a mountain of travertine and concrete that seems to defy the very laws of nature. You've seen hills smaller than this structure. And right next to it, connected by an underground tunnel you can't yet see, is your new home, the Ludus Magnus. From the outside, it doesn't look like a school. It looks like a fortress, a prison. High stone walls, few windows, and a single heavily guarded gate. There is no welcoming orientation, no friendly tour. You and the other new arrivals are shoved through the gate into a large, sun-drenched courtyard of packed sand. The gate clangs shut behind you. a sound of finality that echoes in your bones. This is it. This is your world now. The man who owns you, the Lanista Decimus, is waiting. He's not a towering warrior. He's a businessman. He has the soft hands of a man who counts money, not the calloused fists of a fighter. He circles you and the others like a wolf inspecting a flock of sheep, his eyes cold and appraising. He is calculating profit and loss. He looks at your height, your reach, the muscle on your frame. He orders you to strip. There is no modesty here. That is a luxury for free men. You are a piece of meat on the butcher's block. He pokes and prods, checking for old injuries, signs of weakness or disease. He's not looking for a hero. He's looking for a durable piece of equipment. Alongside him is another man, older with intelligent, weary eyes. This is the medicus, the doctor. His examination is even more thorough. He feels your joints, checks your teeth, looks for any sign of a hidden ailment that could ruin the investment. You are less a patient and more a used chariot being checked for a bent axle. His touch is clinical, detached. You pass the inspection. You are deemed a promising, if unrefined, asset. You are worth the food it will take to train you, for now you are given a rough tunic, a number, and a new name. Your old name, the one your mother gave you, is irrelevant. It is scrubbed from existence. You are now Batavus. It's short, simple, easy to shout in the heat of combat. You are led away from the courtyard down a flight of stone steps into the belly of the ludus. The cells are small, damp, and arranged in 2 tiers around the central training yard. Your new home is a stone box barely large enough for 2 men. It contains 2 stone bunks with straw mattresses that smell faintly of mold and desperation. A bucket for waste, and nothing else. The only light comes from the barred opening that looks out onto the yard. There is no privacy, no silence. The air hums with the constant sound of men coughing, snoring, muttering in their sleep. It is the sound of 100 broken lives crammed together. Your cellmate is a Celt named Castus. He's been here a year. He looks at you with a mixture of pity and contempt, the way a veteran looks at a raw recruit. He says nothing, just points to the empty bunk. That's your space. Welcome home. The day ends not with a sunset, but with the clang of another iron gate, locking your section of the barracks for the night. You lie on the scratchy straw, the nagging ache in your left shoulder already starting to flare up from the journey. You stare into the darkness and try not to think about the forest, the sky, or the life that was stolen from you. Sleep does not come easily. It probably never will again. What you don't know yet, what you can't possibly comprehend, is that the physical fight in the arena is only a small part of the battle ahead. The real war is against the slow, grinding despair that threatens to consume you right here in this very cell. The days that follow bleed into one another, forming a monotonous cycle of pain, exhaustion, and food. There is no yesterday, no tomorrow, only the grueling eternal now. Your life is governed by the sound of a horn. It blares before the sun has even considered rising, a brutal assault on your sleep. You stumble out of your cell into the pre-dawn chill of the training yard. The air is cold enough to see your breath, and the sand is damp and heavy under your bare feet. The first part of the day is conditioning. You run endless laps around the yard until your lungs feel like they are on fire. You do push-ups, lift heavy stones, and engage in brutal wrestling matches with the other Tyrones, the other rookies. The doctors, the trainers, watch over you with the detached cruelty of men who have seen it all before most of the doctors are ex-gladiators themselves. Men who survived long enough to earn their freedom, symbolized by the wooden sword, the rudies. They are walking museums of scar tissue with limps and missing fingers that serve as a constant silent lesson in the price of failure. They carry long wooden rods and they are not afraid to use them. A moment of hesitation, a sloppy move, a hint of weakness, and the rod cracks across your back or legs. The pain is sharp and immediate, a physical punctuation mark to their shouted instructions. There is no encouragement, no positive reinforcement. There is only the rod, the shouted curse, and the silent judgment in their eyes. You learn quickly that pain is your new teacher, and its lessons are brutally effective. After the morning's conditioning comes the food. You are always hungry, a deep, gnawing emptiness that seems to live permanently in your stomach. The meals are not feasts. They are fuel and nothing more. You are fed a thick, bland porridge made of barley and beans. This is the Sagina, the gladiator's diet. It's heavy, starchy, and designed for one purpose, to pack on weight. You and the other men are nicknamed the Barley Men. A lean, chiseled physique is for statues and movie posters. In the arena, a layer of fat is a life-saving cushion. It protects your muscles and organs from superficial cuts. It also makes for a more spectacular fight. A bleeding wound on a fleshy body looks far more dramatic to the crowd than a decisive, clean strike. The audience wants a show, and your body is being sculpted to provide it, right down to the way you bleed. You eat the gray slop greedily, not for its taste, but for the energy it provides to survive the afternoon. The afternoon is for weapons training. You are not handed a real sword. That would be like giving a loaded gun to a prisoner. Instead, you are given a rudis, a heavy wooden sword, and a wicker shield. Your opponent is the palace, a thick wooden stake driven into the ground. For hours upon hours you attack the palace. You lunge, you parry, you strike. The doctor stands behind you, correcting your form, shouting commands. Keep your shield up. Lower your stance. Strike from the shoulder, not the wrist. The movements are repetitive, mind-numbing, but they are slowly burned into your muscle memory. The wooden sword feels heavy and clumsy in your hand. The wicker shield chafes your arm. Your muscles scream in protest. The nagging ache in your left shoulder has graduated to a full-throated roar. You ignore it. You have to. Slowly you begin to be categorized. The lanista and his trainers watch you, assessing your strengths and weaknesses, your body type, your temperament. Are you quick and agile? Perhaps you'll be a retiarius with a net and trident, fighting with minimal armor. Are you strong and heavily built? Then you might be destined to become a murmillo or a secutor encased in heavy bronze armor, a walking tank armed with a large shield and sword. This isn't about your personal preference. It's a business decision. They are slotting you into a product category, shaping you to fill a specific niche in the market of violence. You have no say in the matter. You are told one day that you will train as a Thrax, a Thracian-style fighter with a small square shield and a curved sword called a Sika. Why? No reason is given. It has been decided. That is your new identity. Injury is a constant companion, a twisted ankle from the morning run, a splintered hand from a poorly held wooden sword, a cracked rib from a wrestling match that got out of hand. This is where the medicus returns. His name is Galenus, and he is astonishingly skilled. He sets your broken bones with a precision that seems miraculous. He stitches your wounds with fine linen thread, cleaning them with vinegar to prevent infection. He mixes herbal poultices to reduce swelling. His knowledge of anatomy is profound, far beyond that of most doctors in the city. And why wouldn't it be? Here in the Ludus, he has a unique and horrifying opportunity. You and the other gladiators are in essence a captive population of research subjects. Every injury is a chance for him to practice his craft, to learn more about the intricate mechanics of the human body under extreme trauma. He is not healing you out of compassion. He is repairing a valuable piece of equipment. He is protecting the Lanista's investment. As he expertly wraps a bandage around your sprained wrist, you realize the chilling truth. Your health is only important because a healthy body can fight, and a fighting body can earn money. You are the subject of the most brutal medical trials imaginable, and the arena is the laboratory. The line between healer and mechanic is terrifyingly thin, and you are trapped on the wrong side of it. The day will come when his skills are the only thing standing between you and the grave. a fact that is both a comfort and a deep, unsettling horror. Life within the stone walls of the ludus settles into a grim rhythm, but you soon learn that the physical training is only one aspect of your new reality. The social environment is a complex and treacherous landscape, a psychological minefield that is in many ways more dangerous than the training yard. There are around 200 men living here, a volatile mix of cultures, languages, and backgrounds, all simmering in a stew of fear, testosterone, and despair. You are Gauls, Thracians, Numidians, and Greeks, men from every corner of the sprawling empire, all stripped of your past and forced into this strange, violent fraternity. Friendships are possible, but they are fragile, temporary things. You find yourself sharing stories in hushed tones with Castus, your Celtiberian cellmate, and a giant quiet German named Ursus. You bond over your shared hatred for the barley porridge, the cruelty of a particular doctor, the knowing ache of homesickness. These small connections are a lifeline, a flicker of humanity in the dehumanizing machine of the ludus. But there is always an unspoken tension, a dark shadow hanging over every shared joke and moment of camaraderie. The man you share your meager bread with today could be the man you are ordered to kill tomorrow. The ludus is designed to break down tribal allegiances and forge a new identity, that of the gladiator. But it simultaneously pits you against one another in a constant low-grade competition for status, for better food, for the attention of the trainers. Every man here is both your brother in suffering and your potential executioner. It is a psychological cruelty of exquisite design. Then there is your bizarre status in the outside world. As a gladiator, you are legally classified as infames, a person of infamy. You are at the very bottom of the social ladder alongside prostitutes, actors, and undertakers. You have no civil rights. You cannot vote. You cannot make a will. And your testimony in court is considered worthless. You are, in the eyes of Roman law, little more than a talking animal. And yet, paradoxically, you are also becoming a celebrity. When the trainers occasionally march you through the city streets for a public workout, you see the way people look at you. The men watch with a mixture of awe and contempt. The women watch with something else entirely. Their gaze is hungry, intrigued. They whisper behind their fans, their eyes lingering on your sweat-slicked muscles. You are a taboo, a forbidden thrill. Graffiti starts to appear on city walls praising your prowess or that of a more established fighter. You are both reviled and desired, a monster and a sex symbol. This contradiction is disorienting, a dizzying reminder that you are no longer a person, but a public spectacle, a fantasy onto which others project their fears and desires. This twisted celebrity status brings with it the darkest and most insidious aspect of the Lanista's business empire. Decimus Vipanus is not just in the business of staging fights. He's in the business of bodies, and he monetizes his assets in every way imaginable. He is essentially running a brutal vertically integrated corporation built on human flesh. One evening you are pulled from your cell by a guard. You are not told where you are going. You are washed, oiled, and given a clean, simple tunic. You are then escorted out of the ludus through a side gate and into a waiting litter. You are taken to a lavish villa on the Esquiline Hill, the home of a wealthy senator. You are not there to fight. You are there to be an ornament. You are made to stand silent and imposing in the corner of a dining hall while the senator and his guests feast, a piece of dangerous exotic decor to impress his friends. You are a living statue, a symbol of your host's power and wealth, proof that he can afford to rent the city's most infamous men as party favors. But it gets worse. The Lanista runs another even more profitable side business from within the ludus. Some nights it is not a senator's party you are taken to. It is a private room where a wealthy matron bored with her aging husband has paid an exorbitant sum for a night with a gladiator. There is no romance in this, no seduction. It is a commercial transaction. You are a slave, and your body is not your own. You have no right to refuse. To do so would mean a flogging or worse. This is forced prostitution, plain and simple. Another service offered by the diversified enterprise that is the ludus. It is the ultimate act of dehumanization, a stark reminder that every single part of you, your strength, your scars, your life is for sale. The money from these encounters goes directly into the Lanista's pocket, further fueling the machine that enslaves you. You see it happen to others too. Younger, more handsome recruits are often targeted. There are even a handful of female gladiators, gladiatrices, whose exploitation is just as ruthless. You learn to build a wall inside your mind, a place to retreat to when your body is being used. It is a survival mechanism. Without it, the shame and rage would consume you whole, and so you learn the disturbing truth of your existence. You are not merely being trained to fight. You are the central asset in a sprawling business empire built on blood, sex, and spectacle. The Lanista profits when you train. He profits when you fight. He profits when you are rented out as a status symbol. And he profits when you are sold for a night. He even profits when you die. He can sell your body to medical schools or a purveyor of magical charms. As the blood of a dead gladiator is considered a potent cure for epilepsy, every possibility has been accounted for and monetized. You are trapped in a system designed to extract maximum value from your flesh before it is inevitably discarded. One afternoon, as you finish your drills, a list is posted on the wall of the main barracks. It's the fight card for the upcoming games at the Coliseum, the first games of the season. You scan the list of names, your heart pounding in your chest, and then you see it. Batavus, the Thrax versus Volcanus, the Murmillo. Your name, your first real fight. You are no longer a Tiro just training. In 10 days, you will walk out onto the hot sand of the arena, and 80,000 people will be screaming for your blood. The fear is a cold metallic taste in the back of your throat. The training is over. The real test has just begun. The 10 days leading up to the fight are a blur of heightened anxiety and sharpened focus. Your training intensifies. You are no longer sparring against the palace, but against other gladiators. The wooden swords are replaced with blunted metal weapons that still ring and clang with terrifying authenticity. The trainers are relentless, pushing you past the point of exhaustion, screaming at every mistake. The atmosphere in the ludus has shifted. The low-level camaraderie has been replaced by a tense, nervous energy. Men who once shared a quiet word now eye each other with suspicion, sizing up potential opponents. Sleep becomes a luxury. Your nights filled with disjointed dreams of flashing steel and the roar of a faceless crowd. The night before the games, all the gladiators on the fight card are treated to the Cena Libera, the free dinner. It's a lavish public feast held in the open so that the citizens of Rome can come and get a look at the men who will be fighting for their entertainment tomorrow. You are seated at long tables laden with food you've only dreamed of. Roasted meats, rich sauces, fine bread, and watered-down wine. It's a bizarre spectacle. Gamblers and fans walk among the tables, inspecting you, debating your chances, placing bets on your life, as if you were a racehorse. A young boy stares at you with wide, adoring eyes. A wealthy woman attempts to catch your eye, a predatory smile on her lips. You are the guest of honor at a feast that feels suspiciously like a last meal. You eat, trying to force down the rich food, knowing you will need the energy, but your stomach is a knot of fear. You look across at the other men, their faces illuminated by the flickering torchlight. Some are boisterous and loud, masking their fear with bravado. Others are quiet, withdrawn, lost in their own thoughts. You see Volcanus, your opponent, at a far table. He's a bull of a man, a veteran with a network of scars on his arms. He does not look your way. The morning of the fight arrives with a grim sense of inevitability. You are woken before dawn. There is no training today. You are given your armor. Not the battered training gear, but the real thing. A polished bronze helmet that covers your entire face, leaving only small eye holes for vision. a greave to protect your left leg, an arm guard and the small square shield of a thrax. The metal is cold against your skin. The helmet is claustrophobic, the world reduced to a narrow, terrifying slit. Your breathing sounds unnaturally loud inside the enclosed space. The weight of it all is immense. A heavy metal shell that feels both protective and suffocating. You are handed your weapon, the Sika. Its curved blade sharpened to a razor's edge. It feels alien in your hand, a thing designed for one purpose. You and the other gladiators are then marched from the Ludus through the underground tunnel that connects directly to the Colosseum. This tunnel, the passageway of the dead, is dark and cool. The only light comes from torches set in niches along the walls, casting long dancing shadows. The only sound is the rhythmic clank of armor and the shuffle of feet on the stone floor. Then you begin to hear it. At first it's a low, distant rumble, like faraway thunder. As you get closer to the arena, the sound grows, becoming a deafening physical force that vibrates through the stone, through the soles of your sandals and into your bones. It is the sound of 80,000 people, a single monstrous entity roaring with anticipation. You emerge from the darkness into blinding sunlight. The scale of the place is staggering, an oval of pure spectacle. The stands rise up to the sky, a dizzying wall of humanity. The emperor is there in his gilded box. Senators in their white togas occupy the front rows. Behind them, a sea of citizens all screaming, waving, stamping their feet. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, wine, and something else. The coppery, metallic scent of blood from the morning's animal hunts. The sand of the arena floor is a brilliant, clean yellow, raked to better absorb what is to come. First is the Pampa, the opening parade. You march around the perimeter of the arena in a grand procession, a display of the day's combatants. You hold your weapon aloft, your face a blank mask behind your helmet. The crowd roars its approval. You pass the emperor's box, and as tradition dictates, you raise your arm and shout the famous words, though they feel like ash in your mouth. Ave Caesar, morituri te salutant. Hail Caesar, we who are about to die salute you. Then the preliminaries are over. It is your turn. Your name is announced by the herald, his voice echoing across the vast space. You walk to the center of the arena. Volcanus is already there. He looks even bigger in his full murmillo armor, his fish-crested helmet gleaming in the sun. The Summa Rudis, the referee dressed in a white tunic, gives you both a final instruction. There are rules to this butchery. No striking a downed opponent unless permitted. A fighter can surrender by raising a finger. The referee is the ultimate authority. Then he steps back. A trumpet sounds. The fight begins. All your training, all the hours spent hitting the palace cannot prepare you for this. The fight is not a graceful dance. It is a clumsy, terrifying, and utterly exhausting struggle for survival. Your vision is severely limited by the helmet. You can only see what is directly in front of you. You hear more than you see. The scrape of Volcanus's sandals on the sand, his heavy breathing, the roar of the crowd rising and falling with every move. You circle each other, a deadly ballet of probing attacks and cautious defense. His large shield is like a wall. His straight sword, the gladius, is a lightning-fast threat. Your curved Sika is designed to get around his shield, to hook into his unprotected side. The sheer physical effort is immense. The armor weighs you down, and the sun beats on your bronze helmet until it feels like an oven. Sweat pours down your face, stinging your eyes. Your shoulder, your old nagging companion, screams with every block and parry. You trade blows, the clang of metal on metal echoing in the amphitheater. He is stronger, but you are quicker. You manage to land a glancing blow on his thigh, drawing first blood. The crowd howls its approval. The sight of the red stain spreading on his leg guard sends a jolt of adrenaline through you. He roars in anger and charges his shield, smashing into you with the force of a battering ram. You stumble back, your ears ringing. He presses his advantage, his gladius a blur of motion. You can only defend your shield arm trembling with the effort of deflecting his powerful blows. He is wearing you down. You are losing. Then he makes a mistake. In his eagerness to finish you, he overextends on a lunge. For a fraction of a second, his right side is exposed. Your training takes over. You don't think. You react. You pivot, ducking under his swing and bring your Sika around in a short, vicious arc. The curved blade finds the gap between his armor and his ribs. You feel the sickening crunch as it bites deep. Volcana stops. He looks down, a strange expression of surprise on his face, visible for a moment as he stumbles. He drops his sword and shield and sinks to his knees. The crowd erupts. It is over. You stand over him, your chest heaving, your entire body trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. The Sumerudus steps in, holding his staff between you. Volcanus is still alive, but badly wounded. He looks to the crowd, then to the Emperor's box, his hand raised. One finger extended, begging for Missio for his life to be spared. The power of life and death is no longer in your hands. It belongs to the crowd, to the whim of the Emperor. Today, the mood is merciful. Thumbs are turned up. The Emperor gives a nod. Volcanus is spared. He is helped to his feet by attendants and led away, leaving a trail of blood on the yellow sand. You have won. You have survived. You raise your sword to the crowd and their roar washes over you. But you feel no triumph, no glory. All you feel is a hollow, bone-deep relief and the terrifying knowledge that in a few weeks or a few months you will have to do this all over again. You are led out of the arena, back into the cool darkness of the tunnel. Back at the Ludus, the medicus will stitch your cuts. You'll be given an extra ration of wine. You have proven your value as an asset. Your price has just gone up. And the cycle continues. As our journey through the Ludus Magnus concludes tonight, we're reminded that the past is far from dusty and dull. It's a vibrant, often surprising, and always intriguing tapestry woven with human ingenuity, resilience, and the occasional ancient mystery that still makes us wonder. This is the sleeping archaeologist encouraging you to remain curious about the incredible tales still waiting to be discovered beneath our feet. Our next story is called The Chinese Fleet That Discovered America 70 years before Columbus, and why you've never heard of it. The whole story of Christopher Columbus and the discovery of America has the distinct whiff of a story written by the winners. It's a tale we've all been told, packaged neatly with 3 plucky little ships, a stubborn but visionary captain, and a world that was just sitting there waiting to be put on the right map. The narrative suggests that 15th century Europe was the undisputed center of technological prowess and exploratory zeal, the only civilization with the guts and the gear to cross a major ocean. It's a good story. It's inspiring, it's simple, and it fits nicely on a classroom poster. The only problem is that it's a bit like celebrating the guy who invented the a la carte menu while completely ignoring the existence of the all-you-can-eat buffet that had been operating on a global scale just a few decades earlier. The idea that Europe's age of discovery was some kind of unique, inevitable leap forward for humanity is frankly a hilarious piece of historical marketing. It treats Columbus's voyage as the main event, when in reality it was more like the underfunded indie film that accidentally wins an award, because the blockbuster franchise that was supposed to dominate the box office was abruptly canceled by a new studio head with a deep-seated hatred for expensive special effects and a love for fiscal austerity. The notion that the world was Europe's oyster to be opened was a magnificent accident, a cosmic fluke that only happened because the real players decided to stay home. The story we've been told was not the only one that could have been written. Tonight, you are not a plucky European adventurer with a questionable sense of direction and a talent for sales pitches. You are an admiral, a diplomat, and a military commander of a fleet so vast, so technologically advanced that it would make the entire combined naval power of Europe at the time look like a collection of bath toys. Your flagship alone is 5 times the size of any vessel Columbus will sail, a floating city of teakwood and silk that carries 1,000 men. You lead an armada of hundreds of these ships across the known world, not in search of gold or converts, but as a projection of absolute, unassailable power. You are the commander of the largest fleet the world will see for another 500 years, and the year is 1405. Tonight you are Mahi, a Muslim eunuch from the mountains of Yunnan, and you are about to receive an imperial command from the dragon throne that will send you to the very edges of the world. You are the man history will remember as Zhonghe, the proof of your world. Your incredible, almost unbelievable maritime enterprise isn't found in a grand monument or a chest of gold. The most potent receipt for your legacy lies half buried in the mud of a shipyard in Nanjing. It's a single piece of wood, a rudder post unearthed in the 1950s. It's a colossal timber over 36 feet long. So massive it feels less like a component of a ship and more like the spine of a fallen god. For scale, the entirety of Columbus's Santa Maria could almost sit comfortably on the deck of your flagship, the one this rudder was meant to steer. Finding this rudder post is the historical equivalent of archaeologists in the year 4000 digging up a single house-sized bolt from a Saturn V rocket. It's an artifact so out of proportion with the commonly accepted narrative that it forces a complete and total re-evaluation of what was thought to be possible. It's the undeniable silent testament to a forgotten age of giants. This discovery, made in the drained shipyards of Ming Dynasty China, reveals something extraordinary about the nature of power, ambition, and the thin line between global domination and quiet isolation. As we settle in tonight, we're going to uncover not just what archaeologists found, but what it tells us about the surprisingly relatable lives of people who lived in 15th century China. We'll explore a world where the planet's dominant superpower had the ability to colonize the globe, and then in a historical blink of an eye chose not to. Now dim the lights and prepare to discover why this story will change how you think about the history of exploration. Your story doesn't begin on the sea. It begins in the mountains as far from the coast as one can get, in the rugged, newly conquered province of Yunnan. The year is 1381. You are 10 years old and your name is Mahi. You are not Han Chinese. You are from the Semu people, descendants of Central Asian warriors. And you are a Muslim in a land of Confucian, Taoist, and Buddhist traditions. Your father and grandfather are respected figures, having made the Hajj to Mecca, a journey that to your young mind seems as fantastical as a trip to the moon. They have seen the world, and their stories plant a seed of curiosity in you about the lands that lie beyond the horizon. But the world for now is a small and dangerous place. The Ming Dynasty has arrived to pacify Yunnan, to bring it fully into the imperial fold after the expulsion of the Mongols. Pacification, you learn at a very young age, is a gentle word for a very brutal process. One day the world ends. Ming soldiers overrun your home. Your father, a former official under the now defeated Mongol Yuan dynasty, is killed in the fighting. You are captured. You are a child. But you are also the son of an enemy, a potential future threat. The solution in the cold calculus of empire building is both pragmatic and horrific. You are castrated. It's a brutal, life-altering act, designed to sever you from any possibility of a lineage, to erase your future and bind you irrevocably to the service of the state. You are now a eunuch in the eyes of the world. You are less than a man, a broken thing destined for a life of servitude in the shadows of power. As you recover, a boy of 11, you are sent north to the court of Zhudi, the Prince of Yan, the fourth son of the Hongwu Emperor. This, you think, is the end of your life. You have no way of knowing it is the beginning of a partnership that will reshape the world. Life in the prince's court is a strange mixture of drudgery and high-stakes politics. You are an attendant, a servant, but you are also intelligent, strong, and tall for your age. More importantly, you are an outsider, having no family, no land, no prospect of heirs. Your loyalty can be absolute. The Prince of Yan, Zhu Di, is a brilliant, ambitious, and deeply paranoid man. He is a warrior prince stationed in the north to defend the border against the ever-present threat of Mongol resurgence. He sees something in you, a shared sense of being on the periphery, a quiet competence, a fierce loyalty born of having no other options. You do not just serve him, you learn from him. You ride with him on military campaigns into the vast cold grasslands of the steppe. You study maps, learn logistics, and master the art of commanding men. You are a eunuch, a servant, but on the battlefield, you are a commander. You rise through the ranks of his household, becoming one of his most trusted advisors. You are his shadow, his confidant. Years pass. The old emperor dies. His grandson, a young, inexperienced scholar, takes the throne. The new emperor and his Confucian advisors in the capital, Nanjing, are wary of his powerful uncles, especially Zhu Di up in the north. They see him as a threat, a relic of a more brutal martial age. They begin a systematic campaign to strip the regional princes of their power to deploy them. Zhu Di, your master, sees thee, writing on the wall. He knows he has two choices: submit and be slowly dismantled, or rebel and seize the throne for himself. Being the man he is, the choice is obvious. In 1399, a bloody civil war erupts. You are by his side, not as a trembling servant, but as a key military strategist. You distinguish yourself in battle, commanding troops, planning assaults. You are instrumental in his campaigns. You are proving that a man's worth is not determined by what has been taken from him, but by what he chooses to build with what remains. After 3 years of brutal fighting, Zhu Di's armies march into Nanjing. The imperial palace burns. The young emperor vanishes, presumed dead, though rumors of his escape will haunt the new reign for decades. Your master, the Prince of Yan, is now the Yongle Emperor, the third ruler of the Ming dynasty. And you, Mahi, the captured Muslim boy from Yunnan, are now one of the most powerful men in China. The emperor bestows upon you a new name, a high honor. He gives you part of his own surname, Zheng. From this day forward, you are known as Zheng He. Your old life is gone. Your new life as the emperor's grand director is about to begin, and with it, a project of such staggering scale and ambition, it borders on madness. The Yongle Emperor is a man of immense appetites and insecurities. He is a usurper and he knows it. He needs to legitimize his rule, not just to his own people but to the entire world. He needs to project an image of such overwhelming power and prosperity that no one would dare question his right to sit on the dragon throne. He wants to do what his father and nephew could not. Bring the entire world into China's orbit, not through conquest, not in the European sense. That would be crude, expensive, and frankly beneath the dignity of the Middle Kingdom. No, he wants tribute. He wants the kings and sultans of the world to acknowledge his supremacy, to send envoys to kowtow before his greatness, and to trade on his terms. He wants to create a global order with China at its unquestioned center. It is the grandest public relations campaign in history, and you, Zheng He, are to be its chief executive officer. The emperor gives you a simple, impossible command. Build a fleet, not just any fleet, a treasure fleet. A fleet so large it will blot out the horizon, so magnificent it will awe foreign kings into submission, so powerful it will crush any who dare to resist. It is to be the physical embodiment of Ming China's glory. He moves the capital from Nanjing to the north to a new city he is building, Beijing, complete with its Forbidden City. But the shipbuilding will happen in the south in the massive state-of-the-art shipyards at Nanjing. You are put in charge of the entire operation. It is a logistical challenge on a scale that makes building the pyramids look like a weekend DIY project. You arrive at the Longjiang shipyards on the banks of the Yangtze River, and you are now in your element. This is not about courtly intrigue or battlefield tactics. This is about engineering, logistics, and management on a godlike scale. The yards are a city unto themselves, sprawling with thousands of workers. The air is thick with the smell of sawdust, pitch, and the river itself. The sound is a constant symphony of hammers, saws, and the shouts of foremen. You need wood, not just any wood. You need massive timbers of teak and nanmu felled in forests 1,000 miles away in Southeast Asia and floated down rivers to the yards. You need iron for nails and anchors forged in government foundries. You need tung oil to waterproof the hulls, bamboo for rigging, and acres of silk for the sails. Sails that will be dyed a brilliant imperial red. You oversee the construction of hundreds of vessels of all shapes and sizes. There are water tankers, troop transports, ships for carrying horses, and patrol boats. But the heart of the fleet, the star of the show, are the baochuan, the treasure ships. The historical records, which some modern scholars still find difficult to believe, describe these ships as being over 400 feet long and 160 feet wide. They are 9-masted behemoths, floating fortresses with multiple decks, watertight compartments, an innovation centuries ahead of Europe, and private cabins with balconies. Your flagship is a palace on water, designed to carry not just you and your command staff, but diplomats, astronomers, doctors, translators, and tons of Chinese goods, silks, porcelain, lacquer to be given as gifts. It is also a warship armed with cannons, rockets, and thousands of highly trained soldiers. It's a carrier strike group, a diplomatic embassy, and a floating trade show all rolled into one. As you walk the scaffolding, observing the massive ribs of a treasure ship being pieced together, you feel a sense of profound purpose. The Confucian scholar bureaucrats at court whisper behind their hands. They see this as an extravagant folly, a massive waste of the empire's resources. They are men of the land, suspicious of merchants and foreigners. They believe China's greatness lies within in its culture and its traditions, not in costly overseas adventures. They are, to put it in modern terms, the empire's accounting department. And they are already preparing the audit that will declare your entire life's work to be fiscally irresponsible. You know this. The emperor knows this. But for now, you have his unwavering support, and that is all that matters. You have a deadline to meet. The emperor wants his fleet, and he wants it soon. You have no idea yet where it will go, but you know that wherever it does, the world will be forced to take notice. The sheer existence of these ships is a statement, a message to all creation. The dragon has woken, and it has set its sights on the sea. By 1405, the fleet is ready. It is a sight that defies belief. Nearly 320 ships lie at anchor in the Yangtze River, their red silk sails furled, their countless flags and pennants snapping in the breeze. More than 27,000 men, sailors, soldiers, doctors, interpreters, astronomers, and craftsmen are ready to board. Your flagship, a floating testament to the emperor's ambition and your organizational genius, dwarfs everything around it. Standing on the vast upper deck, you look out over a floating city that you brought into being. You are now in your mid-30s at the height of your physical and intellectual powers. You are the admiral of the Western Seas. Your first mission is to sail to Calicut on the coast of India, the great center of the spice trade, and re-establish the old trade routes and tributary relationships. The journey begins. The fleet sails down the Yangtze out into the South China Sea. For the men on board, many of whom have never seen anything larger than a river junk, the experience is terrifying and exhilarating. For you, it is the culmination of years of planning. Life aboard the ship is a marvel of organization. You are not merely a commander. You are the mayor of a mobile metropolis. The days are governed by the rhythm of the ship, the striking of bells, the changing of the watch, the meticulous work of the navigators. They guide your fleet using sophisticated charts and a deep understanding of monsoon winds. At night, they steer by the stars using star charts and compasses. Another Chinese invention. You can fix your position by measuring the height of the North Star, or once you cross the equator, the Southern Cross. It's a level of navigational science Europe won't master for another century. The fleet is a self-contained world. There are doctors practicing a sophisticated form of medicine with detailed herbaria and surgical tools. There are cooks preparing meals for thousands, using fresh vegetables grown in massive tubs on deck. Livestock, chickens, pigs, and goats are kept in pens. You have ships dedicated entirely to carrying fresh water. The logistics are mind-boggling, yet you manage them with the same quiet efficiency that has defined your entire life. You are creating a new world on the water, a perfect moving extension of Imperial China. Your first major stop is Champa in modern-day Vietnam. Here you put the Yongle Emperor's foreign policy into practice. You do not arrive as a conqueror. You arrive as a bearer of gifts and an instrument of the Emperor's will. You present the local ruler with fine silks and porcelain, and you invite him to send a tribute mission to Beijing. The unspoken message delivered by the sheer, overwhelming size of your fleet is clear. You can accept this generous invitation, or you can be crushed. The king wisely accepts. It is a pattern you will repeat across the Indian Ocean. From Siam to Java, from Sumatra to Malacca, you project power not through brute force, but through overwhelming presence. This isn't colonialism. It's something grander or more arrogant. It's the establishment of a global hierarchy with China at the very top. You aren't here to take their land. You're here to make sure they understand whose world it is. But your journey is not without its perils. In the Strait of Malacca, one of the busiest and most dangerous shipping lanes in the world, you encounter Chen Zuyi, a notorious pirate king. He commands a formidable force and has been terrorizing the region for years. He sees your massive fleet, not as a threat, but as the ultimate prize. He pretends to surrender, planning to lure you into a trap and attack your ships at night. But you are a veteran of war. You have fought on the Mongolian steppe and in the heart of China. You see the deception. Your intelligence network built through local contacts, and your multilingual staff confirms your suspicions. You turn the tables on him in a swift, brutal naval battle. You utterly annihilate the pirate fleet. You capture Chen Zuyi and hundreds of his followers. It's a decisive demonstration of the fleet's military capability. You are not just a diplomat. You are an enforcer. You bring Chen Zuyi back to Nanjing, in chains, where he is publicly executed. The Emperor is pleased. You have secured the sea lanes and brought order to the world. You have no idea that this victory, this act of imperial justice, will be used against you one day by your enemies at court, cited as an example of meddling in foreign affairs. After months at sea, you finally reach your destination, Calicut, India. This is the jewel of the spice trade, a bustling cosmopolitan port where merchants from across the known world converge. Here you are not just an admiral, but a shrewd diplomat and trade representative. You negotiate directly with the Zamorin of Calicut, establishing favorable trade agreements and securing the flow of pepper, ginger, and other precious spices back to China. You leave behind a stone tablet, a stele proclaiming the greatness of the Yongle Emperor and the friendship between the two nations. You return to China in 1407 after 2 years away. You bring with you ambassadors and tribute from dozens of kingdoms. You bring exotic goods, spices, and knowledge. Your ships are laden with treasure. But the real treasure is the prestige you have won for the Emperor. You are welcomed as a hero. The success of the first voyage silences many of your critics at court, at least for a while. The Emperor is overjoyed and immediately commissions a second voyage and then a third and a fourth. For the next 2 decades, this becomes your life. You are a man of the sea, more at home on the deck of your flagship than in the corridors of the Forbidden City. The voyages become more ambitious. You sail further to the Persian Gulf, to the port of Hormuz, the gateway to the Middle East. You make contact with the Arab world, a world not entirely unfamiliar to you, a Muslim. You facilitate trade in pearls, carpets, and Arabian horses, which are highly prized by the Ming military. On your fourth voyage, you sail down the coast of Africa. The scale of your ships and the wealth you display is beyond the comprehension of the local Swahili city-states. In Malindi, in modern-day Kenya, the local ruler presents you with a gift for the emperor, a creature so strange, so otherworldly that it will become a legend in China, a giraffe. When you return to China with this animal, it causes a sensation at court. The scholars well-versed in ancient myths believe it to be the mythical Kailin, a creature of good omen, a sign that heaven approves of the Yongle emperor's reign. It's a political coup, a living, breathing symbol of the emperor's virtue and the success of your voyages. The giraffe is presented at court, and it is a moment of supreme triumph for you and your master. You have literally brought a mythical beast to the emperor's feet. It's the ultimate validation of your entire enterprise. You have connected China to the wider world in a way no one thought possible. You have shown that the emperor's mandate extends to the furthest corners of the earth. You have done everything he asked of you and more. But even as you stand at this pinnacle of success, the political winds in Beijing are beginning to shift. A storm is gathering, one that will ultimately scuttle your great fleet and erase your legacy from the pages of history. The years continue to pass, in a rhythm of voyages and returns. You lead a total of 7 expeditions between 1405 and 1433. You sail to Mogadishu, to Aden at the mouth of the Red Sea. And some of your ships may have even continued on to Mecca, allowing some of your Muslim crew members to complete the Hajj, a journey your own father once made. You chart the coastlines, document the cultures, and collect the tribute. You are the embodiment of China's brief, brilliant age of global engagement. You are at the height of your power, an old man now, but still the most accomplished mariner the world has ever known. And then it all comes to a grinding, inexplicable halt. The problem starts, as it so often does, with money and politics, your patron. The Yongle Emperor dies in 1424 while on a military campaign in the north. His son, the Hongxi Emperor, takes the throne. He is a scholar, bookish and cautious, and he has always been sympathetic to the Confucian bureaucrats who despise your voyages. To them, the treasure fleet is a monument to Yongle's hubris and your personal ambition. It's a ruinously expensive vanity project that drains the treasury, encourages a dangerous interest in foreign novelties, and empowers the eunuch faction at court, your faction, at the expense of the traditional scholar gentry. They argue, not without some justification, that the real threats to China are on its northern border with the Mongols. The money spent on your floating palaces, they say, would be better spent reinforcing the Great Wall. The new emperor agrees. One of his first acts is to cancel the voyages. He orders the ships to be laid up and the crews to be disbanded. It is a stunning reversal. For a moment it seems your life's work is over. But the Hongxi Emperor's reign is short. He dies within a year. His son, the Xuande Emperor, takes over. He is the grandson of your great patron Yongle, and he remembers the glory of the early voyages from his childhood. He wants to recapture some of that prestige. He authorizes one final voyage, one last grand expedition to restore China's influence abroad. In 1431, you set sail for the 7th and last time. You are now 60 years old. This voyage is a farewell tour. You revisit the great ports of the Indian Ocean, shoring up diplomatic ties, saying your goodbyes. You leave behind stone monuments like the trilingual stele in Sri Lanka, inscribed in Chinese, Tamil, and Persian, a testament to your multicultural diplomatic approach. But you can feel that the era is ending. The energy, the unbridled ambition of the Yongle era is gone. When you return to China in 1433, the political climate has turned irrevocably against you. The Xuande Emperor, while more sympathetic than his father, is also under immense pressure from the Confucian faction. The arguments for fiscal responsibility and isolationism have won. A decree is issued. It is now a capital crime to build a multi-masted ship. The shipyards at Nanjing fall silent. The great treasure ships, the most advanced vessels on the planet, are left to rot at their moorings. Some are burned. The official records of your voyages, the detailed charts, the logs, the astronomical data. All of it is ordered to be destroyed by the Minister of War. He claims they are deceitful exaggerations of bizarre things. But the real reason is political. Your legacy is an inconvenient reminder of a different path, a different vision for China. They want to erase you. They want to turn China inward, to build the wall higher, to pretend the outside world doesn't exist. And so, the greatest naval power on Earth deliberately and systematically dismantles its own advantage. China, the nation that could have become a global maritime empire, clips its own wings and chooses to become a continental power once more. You die sometime around 1433, likely shortly after your final voyage. Your story becomes a whisper, a footnote in the imperial annals. Within a generation, the knowledge and skills required to build your great ships are lost. China enters a period of self-imposed isolation, and the vast Indian Ocean, once a Chinese lake patrolled by your fleets, is left with a massive power vacuum. It's a vacuum that a few decades later, a handful of daring, desperate, and far less technologically advanced sailors from Portugal and Spain will be more than happy to fill. And this is where we leave history and enter the realm of speculation. But it's a speculation grounded in everything you were and everything your fleet represented. Imagine for a moment that it had gone differently. Imagine the Yongle Emperor lived another 10 years. Or imagine that his grandson, the Xuande Emperor, had his grandfather's iron will and told the Confucian accountants to go count their beans somewhere else. Imagine that the order for the 8th voyage came, but this time the order was different. Not west to the known world of India and Africa, but east into the endless, terrifying expanse of the Pacific. Your astronomers have long speculated about lands on the other side of the world, a mirror to your own great continent. Your navigators have the skill. Your ships have the capability. They are large enough to carry supplies for months, even years. They are seaworthy enough to withstand any storm the Pacific can throw at them. So you set sail, an armada of treasure ships heading east from the coast of China, following the currents. After months at sea, your lookout spot land. It's a new world. You land somewhere on the coast of what we now call California. What happens next? This is the crucial question. When Columbus and his successors arrived in the Americas, they came as conquerors driven by a lust for gold, a need for land, and a fervent desire to convert the heathens. They were, in a sense, desperate. Their kingdoms were small, their resources limited. They needed the wealth of the New World to fund their European wars. They brought with them not just guns and steel, but diseases that would wipe out up to 90% of the indigenous population. It was a demographic catastrophe that paved the way for conquest and colonization. But you are not desperate. You are the admiral of the most powerful and wealthiest nation on Earth. You do not need gold. Your ships are already laden with treasures to be given as gifts. You do not need land. Your emperor rules over a territory vast beyond the comprehension of the local inhabitants, and you do not have the same missionary zeal. You are a Muslim leading a largely Buddhist and Taoist fleet on behalf of a Confucian emperor. Your mission has never been to convert, only to command respect. So you do what you have always done. You anchor your massive fleet offshore, a sight that must seem like the arrival of gods to the people on the shore. You send a smaller party to land bearing gifts, silk, porcelain, intricate lacquer. You use your teams of interpreters to try and establish communication. You find the local leaders, the chiefs of the tribes. You do not demand their submission in the name of a god they've never heard of. You invite them. You invite them to send an ambassador back with you to the Middle Kingdom to see the glory of the Yongle Emperor, to kowtow before the Dragon Throne, and to be entered into the great celestial harmony of nations under Chinese dominion. You might trade collecting exotic plants, animals, curiosities. A turkey might cause as much of a stir in Beijing as the giraffe did. You might establish a small fortified trading post, a foothold, but you would not conquer. It's not your way. It's not the Chinese way. Not at that time. The goal is not occupation, but acknowledgement, and crucially, you do not bring the same devastating cocktail of diseases. While your crew certainly carries pathogens, the centuries of trade and interaction across the old world of Asia, Europe, and Africa, the world you have just stitched together with your voyages, mean that the populations on your side of the ocean have developed a much broader range of immunities. The biological devastation would be far, far less severe. The great dying that emptied the Americas and made European conquest possible might not happen. You would return to China with news of this new land. Perhaps the emperor would be interested. Perhaps he would send more fleets, establishing a tributary relationship with the Aztec or Inca empires. Imagine a Ming diplomat attempting to explain the concept of the mandate of heaven to Montezuma. The history of the world would fracture. There would be no Spanish galleons filled with Inca gold, no British colonies in New England, no United States of America. The entire trajectory of the last 600 years would be irrevocably altered. The Industrial Revolution, the Enlightenment, the very idea of the West, all of it would be different or might not have happened at all. America would not be a new Europe, but a distant exotic tributary on the far eastern frontier of a Chinese world order. But it was not to be. The voyage east never happened. The order never came. The ships rotted. The records were burned. And so 70 years later, when 3 small cramped ships from Spain, commanded by a Genoese captain who believed he had reached the Indies, stumbled upon the same continent, they found a world that was from their perspective theirs for the taking. History pivoted not on the strength of Europe, but on the voluntary, deliberate withdrawal of China. The modern world was born not from an act of discovery, but from an act of forgetting. China had the whole world in its hands, and it simply let go. Your story is the ghost of that other possibility, a reminder of how easily the flow of history could have been diverted, and how the world we know today rests upon a foundation of choices made, and more importantly, choices not made in a distant court half a world away. You were the greatest admiral of your age, perhaps of any age, and your ultimate legacy is the world that might have been. As our journey through the voyages of Zhang concludes tonight, we're reminded that the past is far from dusty and dull. It's a vibrant, often surprising, and always intriguing tapestry woven with human ingenuity, resilience, and the occasional ancient mystery that still makes us wonder. This is the sleeping archaeologist encouraging you to remain curious about the incredible tales still waiting to be discovered beneath our feet. Good night.